Hi guys, I'm Erik Voss, and as you can see behind me, our new studio is coming along nicely. And this is a breakdown of The Walking Dead Season 7, Episode 7, Sing Me a Song. And after a few weeks of kinda slow episodes, it's amazing how much better the show can get by just sticking close to the comics and giving characters we actually care about interesting things to do. But in fairness, when I think of The Walking Dead, I definitely think of Tara eating fish stew. Now, this is a slightly longer episode, so there's a lot to talk about. Stuff that you missed, stuff from the comics, the hidden meaning, and what it could all be possibly setting up for next week's mid-season finale. So let's get started with the opening images. So the opening shot shows Michonnes returning to these burned mattresses that the Saviors took from Alexandria back in episode 4, just to be dicks. Back then, I speculated that this could be a reference to the Godfather line, go to the mattresses, which means to prepare for war.
You give him one message, I want Salvas. If not, it's all out war, we go to the mattress.
And that's exactly what Michonnes is doing here, making a move towards battle by tracking down the Sanctuary and Negan. But there's a deeper meaning to these mattresses. They're a symbol for domestic life, a bed, a place of comfort and safety, now corrupted and ruined by Negan. So that idea of the perversion of domesticity comes up again and again throughout this episode, so I will come back to it. Now, Michonnes' whistling here is kind of unsettling for a few reasons. For one, this is The Farmer in the Dell, which is a children's nursery rhyme, and she's using it to attract walkers for slaughter. But also, ever since Negan arrived last season, whistling on The Walking Dead has taken on a new dark undertone. Like Negan and the Saviors, Michonnes is whistling as a device to lure in these targets into a trap. And like Negan, she takes out her rage on two scapegoats. So she's not just gathering walkers for a barricade, Michonnes is also trying to feel in charge of her own life by reenacting Negan's punishment. Alright, moving on to this scene with the two Saviors on the truck. We get a tiny insight into the Saviors' war strategy and point of view. They talk about how Fat Joey used demolition sticks and Daryl's RPG to block off roadways to herd walkers, calling it guerrilla warfare. And remember, they used these same kinds of creative roadblocks to catch Rick and his people last season. And when this guy says,
maybe it takes it down, takes him out,
he actually sounds relieved, and I think he might be talking about Rick. And that would actually make sense for these runners and soldiers to still see themselves as underdogs, because Rick and his crew have killed dozens of their people in all these surprise attacks, and they only really got control over them by blocking roadways and eventually fear, just by killing only a very small number of them. So the point is, I think any war between these two sides will be way more evenly matched than anyone thought. Okay, moving on to this statue that Jesus sees as they approach the sanctuary. It's holding a severed walker head, much like that angel statue that we saw in episode 3 with severed arms tied to it. So once again, we're seeing that idea of the symbol of comfort and safety being perverted by Negan. But also, I'm pretty sure this is a statue of St. Francis of Assisi. He was a Catholic friar in the Middle Ages who was famous for miraculously taming a wild wolf that was terrorizing a village. Now, before I talked about in the first episode, Negan's breaking down of Rick was intended to match the way that you would bring a dog to heel. Negan does a similar thing to Rick's son this episode, whistling when he initially sees him and scolding his defiant look.
You know, you do the same damn stink eye as your dad.
And I think this famous wolf tamer is meant to foreshadow all of that. Okay, moving on to Carl's ballsy entrance at the sanctuary, which is definitely one of the cooler moments from this stretch in the comics. And pretty much all the dialogue in this scene is taken directly from issues 104 and 105 from the comics.
You are adorable. I ain't gonna lie, you scare the shit out of me. Is that any way to treat our new guests? Do not shatter my image of you.
But what I was most impressed by was this wide shot of the sanctuary, which looks almost exactly like it does in the panel in the comics, down to those 3 smokestacks, the fire escape stairs, even the missing windows on the far left. Now remember, we didn't see a full wide shot of the sanctuary back in episode 3, only the interior, and there's a reason for that. That episode wanted the sanctuary to feel like a prison cell, and everything feeling claustrophobic, with the shots going from the inside out, from Dwight and Daryl's trapped perspectives. Now, Carl is looking at it from the outside in, seeing a different side of the sanctuary. This grand palace with a king and his court and multiple wives. It's more of a show. And before I move on, that first walker head on the pike that we see with the long hair is a model of executive producer Greg Nicotero's head. Now, moving on inside, it's interesting that Negan says this in his proclamation.
The Saviors have gone out into the world and fought the dead and come back with some really good stuff.
This makes it sound like saviors is a term that Negan only uses for his soldiers and gatherers, not just anyone who lives in the sanctuary. Episode 3 showed us that there's a strict class structure in the sanctuary, and now we know that the term savior refers to this upper privileged class of soldiers, which is exactly how real-world military fascist societies are set up. Okay, moving on to this scene in Alexandria, and notice what kind word Rosita uses to describe Negan.
We're not doing shit for that cabron.
Now, cabron is a common Spanish slur, kind of like dumbass, but in some usages, it's used to insult a man whose wife is cheating on him. And that makes it a super appropriate dig for Negan, considering he spends this whole episode dealing with one of his wives cheating on him, basically the only rule in his creepy polygamist harem that he's super anxious about.
But what can't you do?
Cheat on me.
That is exactly right.
And I'll get back to that sex cult in a second, but I want to talk real quick about this tense exchange between Rosita and Spencer.
We gotta produce for them. It's like taxes.
Pay your taxes and leave me the hell alone.
So all this talk about taxes is reminiscent of the early years of the American Revolution, which began as a revolt over British taxation on the American colonies. And on the American side, there was a divide between two groups. The Patriots, who were the revolutionaries who openly rebelled against paying what they saw as unfair taxes, and the Loyalists, who were American colonists who were still loyal to the crown and wanted peace even if it meant paying taxes. And I think the divide between Rosita and Spencer is mapped over this history, with Rosita being this fiery patriot who's secretly gathering munitions just like American revolutionaries did, and Spencer as the loyalist who doesn't want war. And while there's an argument to be made that Spencer's position is justified, this is an American show, and we hate Spencer's guts, despite how gutsy he thinks he looks in that jacket. I am saying guts a lot. Moving on! Now, compared to Negan's wives in the comics, the show kinda toned it down. Like, we don't get any glamour shot of all these women in lingerie. They're covered up a bit more, and the camera cuts away from them. And I think this is the show continuing to soften Negan a bit. Like, he's still this violent, psychopathic prick, but I don't think the show wants us to hate him that much. Like, I hate to say it, but I've almost forgotten about Abraham and Glenn. Okay, I should have known that was coming. Oh, God. Also, notice this moment between Negan and Sherri, who is Dwight's former wife.
I ever hit one of you?
No. But I know you. There's worse.
This is a callback to Sherri's warning to Dwight back in episode 3.
Whatever he's done to you, there's more. There's always more. It'll be worse.
And at the end of the scene, Negan also echoes Sherri, repeating her line that she said to him to Daryl.
What we talk about when you're not here is none of your business.
What we talk about when you're not here is none of your business.
Also, I don't know if you caught this, but when Carl passes Daryl, Daryl whispers, "Get away." So Daryl talking like this definitely negates that theory that Daryl might have had his tongue cut out, which a lot of people were thinking was the reason it looked like he was blinking in Morse code to Rick in episode 4. Either way, it seems like Daryl is capable of whispering little messages like this if he really wants to. Now let's move on to this scene between Spencer and Gabriel, which might have been my favorite moment this episode, with Gabriel proving he's a patriot too.
What you're saying doesn't make you a sinner. But it does make you a tremendous shit.
And it is awesome to see Gabriel just put Spencer in his place, but it's not just an insult, it's an actual advice. He tells him it doesn't have to be permanent, and Gabriel knows this better than anyone. It wasn't too long ago that he was a tremendous shit himself, betraying Rick to Spencer's mother, Deanna. And now that Gabriel has seen Rick's leadership in action, he respects him, becoming a character that, hey, we don't hate. So you see, Spencer, redemption is possible, if you have the guts for it. Moving on to this private moment with Carl and Negan, that again is taken directly from the comics, with Negan mocking Carl's gross eye hole. Now, it's interesting how Jeffrey Dean Morgan plays this, because Carl crying and Negan apologizing does happen in the comics, but it just never really seems genuine when comic Negan apologizes. He always came off as more of a truly evil psychopath, but here, you almost buy it from Jeffrey Dean Morgan. He seems to actually regret bullying this kid for his scars that he obviously still feels super self-conscious about. In fact, it almost makes me think that Jeffrey Dean Morgan could be pulling inspiration from Negan's recently revealed backstory in the comics, which I won't spoil here, but it does do a lot to humanize Negan and show why he might care about kids' feelings. But then notice how Negan being reunited with Lucille brings back his more sadistic side. And he says this episode's title.
I want you to sing me a song.
So this was the amazing comics moment that we were waiting for since we learned this episode's title. And Negan terrorizing Carl as he sings a lullaby that his mom probably sang to him connects this title and this moment back to that idea of perversion of domesticity that I talked about before. So whenever Carl hears this song now, rather than thinking about how his mom used to tuck him into bed, he's gonna remember Negan swinging a bat around his head. Negan corrupted this loving memory with fear. Okay, moving on to another big scene adapted from the comics, when Negan marks Mark with an iron to the face. And I'm glad that the show actually went through with showing this on screen. That way we can imagine it happening to Dwight, and it was great, even though the show cut away from when the iron first touched his face. And I know I'm being probably too nitpicky and definitely too obsessed with violence, but I'm just saying, if this was HBO, this would have looked a lot more like Viserys' golden crown. But also, two things I want to point out about Negan here. First, I like the way he enters the room banging Lucille on the railing, just like how a judge would bang a gavel to demand attention in a courtroom. This is, after all, Negan's version of a trial. There's a defendant, witnesses, and Negan is the judge, jury, and executioner. And then listen to what Negan preaches.
I wish I could just ignore the rules and let it slide, but I can't. Why?
Now, this is another line from the comics, but it also works as a callback to the governor back in season 3, who outlined a similar ideology to Michonnes.
You've broken the rules. If I don't do anything, I abide anarchy.
Now, in both cases, these egomaniacal dictators use a strict interpretation of the rules to justify extreme and probably unnecessary punishment. Okay, moving on to Spencer pulling this walker out of the tree, and it's kind of a fun mystery how this guy even died. Like, he's tied up to a tree stand that hunters use to hunt deer, and he has a compound hunting bow. So my guess is this guy was a hunter whose torso was scratched up by walkers, and he tried to wait them out up in this tree. And I have another theory in his backstory that I'll bring up later. It's also interesting that he has this list of places that he stores food and supplies written in Latin. Now, this ends up being a callback that connects Spencer to his mother, Deanna, who in episode 5 of last season made plans for the expansion of Alexandria, writing this Latin phrase for Spencer to read that translated to, "Someday this pain will be useful to you," which Spencer recalls at the end of the episode.
Latin. It's a pain in the ass class. My mom said that pain would be useful someday.
And now, Spencer has found a practical use for his mother's wisdom, and he feels like he's filling her shoes as a caretaker of Alexandria. But in case you've been missing some of my not-so-subtle jokes, I do think this show is making some moves to foreshadow Spencer following in his mother's footsteps in other ways too, namely her death. Like, obviously, Spencer's face is covered in blood here, just like Deanna's face when she died last season. Also, notice that he said that he got this list
From a dead guy with a plan.
and that may be foreshadowing himself as a guy with big plans who really may just be a dead man walking. Okay, moving on. A lot of people are wondering what kind of punishment Negan plans on giving Carl. And Negan makes up his mind in this moment when Carl shows his defiance in another great line from the comics.
You should jump out the window to save me the trouble of killing you.
So Negan doesn't want to kill Carl because breaking people in is more practical and more fun for him. But his attempts to break Carl haven't really worked yet. And he knows Carl is more useful as a tool to get at Rick. So if Negan were to keep Carl, Rick might be driven to start a war to get him back. Negan knows that Carl needs to stay at home with Rick because Rick is more useful to him when he has something to lose. There's a few callbacks here to episode 10 of last season that I really liked. So Jesus hides on the roof of the truck again, just like in that episode, and notice how Daryl sees him hopping down right before the truck pulls away. Daryl's like, damn, how does this guy keep getting up on trucks? But then also notice how Negan flips off Daryl as he leaves him behind, just like how Daryl flipped off Jesus as they left him behind in that episode. And we don't know exactly who slipped Daryl the note with the key tape to it that said "Go now" in his prison cell. Like, some people are saying it could be Sherri, but I think it's more likely Jesus because "Go now" is exactly what he says to Carl right before they parted ways and Carl didn't listen.
We just gotta go now.
And then real quick, we see Michonnes getting a jump on this savior by using the same guerrilla warfare tactic that the other savior referenced at the top of the episode, blocking off the roads and sneaking up on the enemy from the brush. And then let's move on to when Negan returns Carl to Alexandria. Olivia shows Negan that the women of Alexandria aren't anything like the women of the sanctuary.
I think it would be enjoyable to screw your brains out. I mean, if, you're agreeable to it.
And I gotta say, I'm a little worried about Olivia. For a minor character, she's gotten a lot more screen time this half season, and the minor victory of giving Negan the slap he definitely deserves definitely feels like a character arc coming to an end. And I know I might be reading into things, but as we saw with Denise last season, The Walking Dead loves to kill off people right after they get a win. Now, with a title like Sing Me a Song, this episode has been very musical, with Carl's song and Negan and Michonnes whistling, and this track that plays over Negan touring Rick's house and feeling carpet for the first time in probably a while.
Cock your pistol and root-a-toot-toot.
So this is called Bang Bang by Janice Martin. It's a 1958 rockabilly song about lovers making a deal. And these lyrics that focus on trading and the chorus of Bang Bang, it definitely connects to the deal at gunpoint that Rick is under right now. All right, moving on. Earlier, Rick and Aaron hopped the gate with this sign warning them of trouble, and now they find this even better sign. Now, I love every time The Walking Dead leaves these markings made by people from alternate stories that we may never see. It makes the world feel more authentic and lived in, or died in. And this Leslie Williams Starton guy sounds exactly like a lot of Walking Dead fans that I found online who seem to be actually preparing for a zombie apocalypse. Like, as soon as them zombies rise, I'm taking my 12 gauge, my AR-15, my rocket launcher, and my 2x4 with nails sticking out of it, and some Slim Jims to swim out in the middle of a lake. Do your best, zombies! Also, there's a theory that this guy is the same guy that Spencer found in the tree, and that boat is pulled ashore, so maybe he came to the land at some point. But I don't know if this guy has that many firearms. He probably wouldn't have just gone out with a simple hunting bow, and I don't think Rick and Aaron were anywhere near where Spencer was. Now, the closing images bring us back to Alexandria with this creepy image of Negan threatening to bury Rick and Carl while holding Judith and smiling in her face. This comes back to that idea of the perversion of domesticity, and just like he did when he asked Carl to sing me a song, Negan is restaging this classic image of a home, a father with his children drinking lemonade on the porch. But we know that this isn't right. That's not Rick, it's an imposter. Just like everything he touches, Negan's presence here corrupts this domestic image into something far more sinister. Okay, 2 lingering questions. 1, who do you think has been the most set up to die? I mean, let's face it, next week is the mid-season finale, and it's titled Heart Still Beating, perhaps a reference to something Negan says after he kills someone. Now, I already mentioned Olivia, but Spencer and Rosita both look like they're about to make a big move. Like when they return to Alexandria, Spencer says,
I'm gonna do more than that.
as in he intends on ousting Rick, and then Rosita says,
He's here.
as in Negan. That bullet is clearly meant for him, and this revolutionary is not throwing away her shot. So we'll see. And 2, do you think Negan could be a good person deep down? I know we saw him iron a guy's face and be super creepy around Olivia and Judith, but Carl killed 2 of his guys, and all he did was make him sing, apologize for making him cry, and then bring him home. To me, that doesn't sound evil. It just sounds like a kinda tough chorus teacher. Okay, thanks for watching, and thanks for bearing with us as our new studio space comes together. So let me know what you think about this episode of The Walking Dead in the comments, and check out my breakdowns of all the Walking Dead episodes this season. Also, please hit like and subscribe to New Rockstars, and share this video with all your friends. You can also contribute to us on Patreon. Thanks so much to all of our current donors. You guys are amazing, and if you aren't currently a patron, we would love your support. You can follow me on Twitter at EA Voss with any thoughts or questions you have about The Walking Dead, or you can follow New Rockstars on Twitter at New Rockstars for updates on when our videos are coming out. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.